Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. And today, I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Sanjay Prakash, who's an architect who aims to make a zero waste and pollution free cities. He has designed efficient, regenerative, and eco friendly architecture to promote contemporary urbanism. His area of practice and research includes passive and low energy architecture and planning, hybrid air conditioning, autonomous energy and water systems, bamboo and earth construction, community based design of common property, and computer aided design. And he's currently the principal consultant at Shift, Studio for Habitat Features, an energy conscious company. So, Sanjay, really appreciate you taking time and being part of our humble podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
In your bio, it says you aim to make a zero waste, pollution free, sustainable cities. How do you plan to go about making a zero waste, pollution free, sustainable, equitable city?
Well, the zero waste probably is the easiest of all these things to do, because as it is in India, we tend to treat all waste as valuable, and there is a whole system of kabadiwalas which recycle waste and so on. So that is probably the easiest to do. The water is the most difficult actually, and the energy is quite abundant. So as long as we don't use it in a profligate way, in a way that is very wasteful, we are actually going to be quite easy to uh, do a zero energy or net zero energy schema.
Right. I mean, yes, there are ways, but it seems we are pretty much far away from getting to a zero waste city. Though I think there in Japan, there's Kamikatsu, which is a complete zero waste city. And I hope that India kind of adopts something like that, because India happens to be amongst the most polluted country, and Delhi happens to be the most polluted city consecutively for the last couple of years. And yes, I think there needs to be a conscious, concerted effort and in finding ways to create cities which is zero waste and sustainable. I was watching one of your episode, a TEDx episode, which was, I think, 31st May 2018. The talk was titled Living Cities. Can you briefly summarize the talk, and what do you mean by living cities?
Well, basically what living cities means is that we should treat cities as if they have a metabolism, which they do. They eat up, gobble resources, they spew out waste. And so, just as we treat our human bodies as living entities, we should start treating our cities as living cities. And once you are there, then the policies change, because pollution, for example, in the air is a symptom rather than a deep cause in itself. So that has to be basically seen as a disease which you need to treat rather than just a manifestation of something that you need to fix by policy. So that requires a lot of care and a lot of gentle touch, which is currently lacking. And that's why you see such odd policies like banning certain kinds of construction, 2-3% there, 2-3% there. And even by the IIT Kanpur report, the most difficult part, which is the banning of industries, is not considered, because that is economy, and everybody, all politicians like to be able to say that they've done good for the economy. So that's really the thing.
Right. Yeah, I do hear you when you say that you need a complete change, a system change, because yes, I mean, so far there are these industries which have kind of been the livelihood of not just the certain hierarchical the leaders of those industries, but also the grassroots people who kind of do build those industries. So I don't really know if banning the industry is the right solution, but yes, I think we need to relook at the entire polluting industries, maybe have some kind of system going on where the government lays a certain structured outlook on what should and what they can't do. Because the way we are consuming, or consumption is growing without any conservation. So in this cycle of constant consumption without conservation, I'm sure we're heading towards a disaster. And you said that pollution should be looked as a disease which is treatable. As somebody who's been vested in sustainable architecture, what's your thinking? How do we treat this symptom or disease that you're talking about? Do you have idea on how we can go about this?
Let me start by saying that there is a pie chart, which is a very quite famous pie chart of produced by IIT Kanpur, which tells us what is the percentage of pollution which is being contributed by a variety of sources, which shows, for example, that nearly 50%, or maybe it's slightly over 50%, is road dust. Now, if that's the case, then clearly we need to invest everything we have in getting sufficient water to clean the roads, like they do in Phoenix or Arizona, which of course they have a different kind of system there. They have a lot of water from the Hoover Dam, but still we need to invest a lot of resources in getting the water. The other thing we need to do probably is to wean away industries and simply not allow certain kinds of industry to be set up on or near Delhi, which is not happening because the dirtier the industry, the more the employment potential. So, so this is an issue that no politician wants to touch, and therefore it will probably not go away. In fact, it's the people who will go away. Like I'm an asthmatic, and therefore I tend to feel that I need to get away from this city rather than the city getting away from the industries. I don't think there is any hope for that.
Right. So my son has a wheezing problem, and we were based out of Bombay. In fact, I was
Mm-hmm.
based out of Bombay for 50 years. And obviously, the way Bombay is growing, it's a small city, and it's like it's being overpacked. And I think it's the same phenomena. The government and the industries are just spawning recklessly without understanding the capacity of the city. Uh, and I think we are heading towards a climate disaster. And the
Yes.
approach of the government needs to be a little bit more constructive in trying to, like you said, possibly stop those industries which are extremely polluting. Because I think there'll be like a reverse migration of sorts, because so far I think people have always wanted to move to cities. Now people are moving out of cities post COVID, because and that's and but I don't think we've got anywhere to run, because it's one small globe. So where can we run? And you said there is like people approaching, like there was Delhi's 50% of the problem is related to road dust, and even that could be solved if we go, the approach could be more public transport as a priority rather than
Yes.
the private transport. Because Singapore
Mm-hmm.
has that approach where they make buying cars
Car ownership,
more difficult, and
car ownership quite difficult.
exactly. So I think if we go towards that approach, then we will have these sustainable, livable cities that we are talking about. Because so far, when we talk about sustainable cities, I don't see any sustainable cities. So again, it's my same question. If you had to, maybe work around and build a sustainable city, what would be the building blocks that you think would require to build a sustainable city?
So first of all, the population should be about 1 million max and no more. And that itself in India would mean a tier 2 city like Ujjain or Indore or something like that, rather than the big metros which are in the 10 million plus range. So clearly, what would happen if something was successful and therefore lots of more people moved in? The solution to that is what Auroville, for example, has explored, that you start a new center rather than expand madly on the periphery. Now, capitalism unfortunately imposes a certain kind of discipline which is very awkward on the uh, how should I put it, on the nature of the city, meaning that there is a positive incentive for people to buy marginalized lands around cities, sell them because people have jobs in the city and they would like to live close by. So more and more private developers keep on building more and more housing around in a what is called a peri-urban area, and this tendency has to be dismantled. But you know what? I think that to dismantle this tendency, you have to dismantle capitalism itself. And that's a big ask. It's a huge ask, because if you dismantle capitalism itself, then what is the alternative? So the alternative has been spelt out by somebody called Tim Jackman, I think his name is. He's a British economist who has talked about how we can have prosperity but without growth. And he postulates early on in this book that we have to have, we cannot grow infinitely, and therefore we have to create better and better conditions for living without necessarily economic growth. And being an economist, he has taken the trouble to postulate a variety of simulations in which this can actually happen. Jackman, for example, has basically talked about how politicians can't take it because GDP growth is still considered the big thing for politicians, and the easiest route to that is capitalism. But he does talk about the fact that there are alternatives possible. And if you read his book, Prosperity Without Growth, I think it would be a very good starting point in designing sustainable societies and therefore sustainable cities. Let's not forget, sustainable cities actually exist in sustainable societies, not the other way around.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm going to check out this book that you mentioned about Tim Jackman, and you rightfully pointed out this capitalism itself. Is the problem, is the core problem, because we are constantly creating business with the ethos of profit at any cost. Until the time we are just pushing that ethos, it's very difficult to come to build things which is sustainable, equitable, and accessible for all. There was this report done by MIT in 1972 called Limit to Growth report.
Limits to growth.
Yeah, limits to growth, and which showed the report. The report projected that possibly by around 2050, the world would meet a global catastrophe, maybe because of climate crisis. Just I think in 2021, the sustainably expert from KPMG, Gaia Harrington, took the same report, added the present day data, the various kind of data, environmental data, pollution data, industry data, and stuff like that. And the projection was that by 2040 the world is going towards a global catastrophe, a climate crisis. And these politicians need to understand, and I think it's not the politicians who are going to make the change. I think it's the people. There needs to be a people's movement. There needs to be more conversation where the narrative needs to be changed, and people need to understand that we have this one blue planet in this huge expanse of nothingness, that and there, this is the only home. And if we don't take care of it, we might not have another place to live. You are the principal consultant at Shift Studio for Habitat Features. Would you like to talk about some of your works that you have built in pushing the conversation of sustainable architecture?
We do our own version of sustainable architecture, which tries to be zero carbon, zero energy as much as possible within today's constraints. And we are kind of capitalists in our own way, because that's how the money for existing comes. So as an architectural practice, we do tend to woo clients, we tend to market ourselves to them. But on the whole, I would say that since I have probably got that reputation, most clients who now come to us with that kind of brief, which is somewhat more sustainable than normal, and we try to, in conversation, push them towards even greater sustainability. So for example, if there's a person who owns a bike but drives a car, I would suggest to him that at least for your local trips, go on your cycle, because even though it's only a drop in the ocean, the fact remains that these little nudges can create a sea change if enough people do it, A. And B, there is somebody, I think in Chennai, he was who told me that little drops are, if they're persistent, can wear away a rock. And little drops, if sometimes they become essences which can create fragrance in the entire room. So nudges can't be pushed away altogether, though nudges, I mean, clearly, even the limits to growth, one of the authors, Dana Meadows, had calculated that she had worked out that if the US Army were to change itself to zero energy, then 60% of, or some such large number of global pollution would come down, global emissions would come down. But I don't know how true that number is, and so on. So, I mean, I've been involved with the limits to growth people, and Dennis, who was one of the co-authors with Dana, was a close friend, and he still writes to me occasionally. So there are, see, what happened in 1972 was poo-pooed, and let me go back a bit. In 1972, these people made what is called a dynamo model of world 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They did 6 versions because they said that each version has its own characteristics. So they created a world in which there's an overshoot and collapse, and one in which there is a steady state being reached, and one in which there's a low level equilibrium being reached. Because once you collapse, you will still reach an equilibrium in say 2060, 2070, something like that, but it will be a low level equilibrium, meaning there will be a lot lower GDP, there will be wars, there will be more pollution, and so on. So those were the kind of worlds that they predicted. But more importantly, in 2002, they did a 30-year update, just like the KPMG people, and they discovered that the predictions were still on dot. It was very shocking because Dennis told me this in one of the Balaton meetings in 2003, that they just finished a 30-year update, and the limits to growth were still holding true, meaning that the overshoot and collapse is probably imminent, and we'd all better just do our own thing and get our own bunkers to prevent it.
So this is so sad and so shocking, but this kind of news does not go out, and even if it goes out, the media or the politician kind of twists the thing, saying there is no climate emergency, and even the
Mm,
approach that India has taken, we're looking at a net zero goal for 2070. I don't even understand what's the maths behind that, and do we have the privilege to wait out till 2070? So it's all very scary, because it's not just us, it's the future generation, the kids. What kind of future are we leaving behind for them? So it's a scary world, and I hope the listeners kind of create more awareness by spreading out the information, so more people know that the world that we are living in, if not,
is not sustainable.
yeah, it's not sustainable, and if we don't take a stance now, things are heading towards a disaster. Studio for Habitat Features, you have done lots of work, built some fantastic architectures around India. How has architecture and design changed from the times when you started till now? How has it evolved, and what is the role of technology in architecture and design today?
Um, so technology manifests itself in architecture and design mainly in the form of the way we make drawings. Um, this is to say, IT, since the 80s, since computer aided drafting came in, and really took over the drafting of various drawings, it has increasingly played its part. But today, it is playing its part by creating three-dimensional views of what we are imagining as something that we'd like to create. But also, there is a lot more tech savviness coming in the consultants that we work with. For example, our structural people are more easy about working with the materials like bamboo and earth than they were in the 1960s, 70s. The air conditioning people consider it their duty to almost eliminate air conditioning and um, not have to spend energy making buildings air conditioned. So that to that extent, this is definitely changing. I think it's the engineers who will change the world, not so much the architects. So it's hopeful that it's the engineering consultants that we use who are beginning to change. For example, I still remember in 1960s, 70s, early 70s, I had started doing a water recycling scheme, and my sanitary consultant said, nothing doing, this is the only way that you will get rid of water or shit water or sewage, is through a septic tank, and you will clean it every 6 months or whatever it is. But today, recycling is a known factor, so much so that any sanitary engineer worth his salt would not be employed if he did not know enough about recycling. So that itself is a very good sign, and I'm hopeful for the best. And in some ways, I'm optimistic, though I'm globally pessimistic, but individually optimistic.
Right. I hope that we shift and change the way we create and design things. There is this designer, Israeli designer called Neri Oxman,
Hmm.
who's leveraging nature, biomimicry in creating sustainable or better architecture. Are there any peers that you are inspired by or you look up to, who you think are taking the right approach in architecture and design?
I would not say. I would not say that. I would. Most of the work that we do is ab initio and fairly original. We start from the principle that no matter what we do, we will create some minor footprint, and that is negative for the world. So there is no such thing as a building that does not create some negative influence. And so once we start with that, we are humbled by the fact that whatever we do, we are in a profession in which we will be doing some bad. So we can do less bad or more bad.
Right.
So to that extent, no, we don't have any peers which we look up to. And everybody is a peer because depending on the nature of the work that they've done, uh, we look to specific people. There is, for example, one person called Michael Frere King, who's an engineer who designs in earth buildings in Arizona, and so on. But then there is Simon Velez, who design in bamboo, and he lives in Colombia, South America. So there are lots of individuals who are specific to a particular technology, but no general peers as a whole.
Right, right. So I've been vested in virtual reality and metaverse. This is this new thing, where we are building the virtual world, which will be like a mirror world of a virtual copy of the physical world. And
Hmm.
in this world, obviously, architecture and design is going to be the key, because the idea is that, with this metaverse that we're talking about, we're trying to simulate the physical world. Somebody who's been invested in architecture and design for the longest time, what would be your advice for the people who are building this virtual world? What could be the engagement metric? What could be that virtual designing or architecture building that will be engaging, and comfortable for the audience? What are your views?
I think the best thing for these guys in metaverse to do would be to be careful about um, what their resource consumption is, both for one-time construction as well as for running a building. We know that running a building takes a lot of resources, and we need to compensate for those resources. So it is quite important for simulations like the metaverse to throw up a realistic image of what those resources will be, because that is the kind of thing that might teach us to be better.
Right. Yeah. I think while you're building the virtual worlds, maybe that will help us maybe design a physical world better. Now there are a lot of these, smart cities which are spawning. There are a lot of smart cities spawning in India. There are a lot of cities spawning abroad. Like, UAE is spending millions of dollars in the city called Neom City. It's called the Line City. What are your views on these smart city? How smart are they according to you?
Not very smart. um, for example, I have met one smart city bureaucrat from the Ministry of Housing And in discussion with him, he was actually kind of groping to find how to define a smart city. And all he could come up with was that instead of resource depletion, he was coming up with putting in more resources in order to make things IT smarter. So I'm I'm not very impressed by the overall. The smarter city was a concept that IBM patented actually, and it was made mainly to sell its systems. So we are caught in some kind of a marketing flux here, where we seem to be. I mean, there was a smarter city person once I met in Hamburg who told me that it's not as if these smart cities are meaningless. For example, in Argentina somewhere, she gave the example of how IBM systems helped to show the city managers where flooding might occur in a particular case, and therefore move the people. But we don't tend to. We should not be living for disaster after disaster, rather than living proactively to create a better world. And that's what I lament. And yet I remain locally an optimist, though globally a pessimist.
What would be your advice to those young architectures, designers?
Well, for a start, a lot of them are already heeding this advice. They should look at sustainability from first principles, and not go for just glamorous stuff, which is what unfortunately in architecture goes off as the fashion of the day, as it were. And and as long as they are true to themselves, I think this will come through, because especially Indian architects know that we need to have something that is. Let's look at equity, for example. I don't know if you are aware, 40% of our illiterate masses get employed in the construction sector. And clearly, there is a tendency to iron them out of the system in order to make buildings lower cost. Now, this is not fair, because you are creating job losses. I mean, you are basically mechanizing construction. You are getting machines to cast concrete and pour concrete instead of human beings. So you will end up ironing these people out of jobs altogether. And then this could create, in the worst case, a revolution, but that kind of never happens in India. But uh, it will still create a lot of strife, and will create a lot of negative emotions. So when I designed my living room roof, I remember designing it. I was lazy, so I designed it with a flat slab. And my wife told me that, hey, you are a good dome mason yourself. So why are you designing a flat slab? You're just being lazy. And she was right. So I said, okay, let me redesign it. So I redesigned my living room roof as a dome. Now, an interesting point about the dome is that it has to be shutterless. Otherwise, it makes no sense. Otherwise, you waste more wood and cut down trees in order to use that wood. So, a shutterless dome is a skill in itself. And we learnt it initially from Nubian masons in Egypt. And later on, we applied it in a mud building in Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts. And now we have it in my living room. So, the important point of this whole story is that this mason, Shabad, actually upskilled himself rather than downskilled himself, because now he can make these domes without shuttering. And in fact, recently I met him and I asked him how he was doing. And he said, I'm doing very well because I have just got a contract for a farmhouse in which I'm doing 6 vaults and 3 domes or something like that. I said, are you using the techniques that I taught you? He said, yes, yes. And they are holding me in good stead and I'm earning well. So he's getting more than 1,000 rupees a day. And that makes his worth much better. So equity is something that is part of sustainability. And I think the sooner we recognize that, the better off we are, because otherwise we will just end up going for joblessness as far as growth is concerned.
Yeah, I hear that. And you mentioned that 40% of the population, I mean, are daily wage laborers, And you
Hmm.
mentioned about this mason of yours who upskilled himself. So, I think, yes, there is that conversation where the role of technology is growing rapidly and is touching all parts of life. It's not just automating a specific industry, but I think in the
Hmm.
next decade, it's going to possibly automate all possible industries, including the art industry, it's started even right now. Because at one point in time, there was this thought that artificial intelligence would not touch the creative industry, but today we have platforms such as Stable Diffusions. What these do is like you throw in a prompt, you put in a text, and the text generates image, audio, video, or whatever you want, and it's in this very nascent stage. So as scary it is, uh, the thing is, I think we'll need to find a way where we create a human machine engagement, where it is scary, but I think that is where the future, because even the space of architecture, we have 3D printed homes which are happening. So somebody who's being invested in the space of architecture and design, how do you address this growing role of technology and this new way of architecture and design? How do you think the future of architecture and design looks like?
So I think there is a huge role for human beings to remain in architecture for a while, maybe 30, 40 years, maybe not much longer than that. But till such time as we have some function to perform, we should perform that function and we should respectfully treat our machines like good tools which help us perform things faster, better, safer, or lower cost, or whatever it is. And we need to respect technology for what it does. But more than anything else, we need to understand what it does, because I have seen too often a new technology comes up and a demo is given in my office, and the youngsters just go gaga over this, and they don't understand that it's going to replace them. So I guess my stance is that yes, wherever you can be human, you have to understand that, and go that way. But wherever you need help, then you can take AI help of all kinds.
Right. Yes. I think we getting into the future where sometimes you are excited by the reference that you could create with leveraging artificial intelligence, but like you rightfully pointed out, so profound that we are all digging our own graves, because to be human is the most important thing. You have built lots of brilliant architectures and designs around India. That, if you had to share amongst the listeners that one specific environment that you built which you are extremely proud of, what would it be, and what is the reason for that?
Well, I think the one that I would cite is Mati Ghar, which is a building which was recently demolished in the Central Vista to make way for the ministries that have been designed by Bimal Patel. And This was because it was built in 1989 as an exhibition structure. It was even lower cost than the steel and plywood structures that would have housed this exhibition otherwise. And it was very low energy as well because it was 90% out of bricks and soil soil blocks and stones, not even nothing fired. So there have been varying percentages of cement in it, 3, 4, 5, 6%, but nothing else. That's it. So we need to understand that, and it's probably therefore one of the most sustainable buildings of our career. It was designed for just 1 year actually, as a temporary building, and then it was extended. Its life was extended. I had certified it for 1 or 2 years more, and then I could not certify it anymore because I said, well, all calculations show that it should not remain standing. And sure enough, about 20 years later, recently, some 30, 35 years have passed. Recently, there was some problem with the foundation. So they wanted me to certify it and or repair it to be safe. And instead of doing that, I had to say that, no, this is not going to stand anymore. So please take it down. And they said, oh, but this is a much loved building for from the point of view of artists who really like this building. So I said, but look, everything has a life, and the life of this was 1 year, and it was extended to 20 years, 20, 30, 40, whatever, 35 years. So don't regret it. And so finally, it went because of not because of Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts, but because of Central Vista.
Lovely. Sanjay, I really appreciate you taking time and being a part of the podcast. Please keep on building, what you're doing. You're doing a great service to society by working towards building sustainable, habitats. Is there any last note that you would like to leave our audience with, what you're building or what comes next for you?
Mm, I think there is a recent book by nobody less than Bill Gates, who has pointed out that in order to build, we require three materials, that is steel, cement, and plastics, which have a huge carbon footprint. And they require heat, they produce carbon dioxide through the heat, or they produce carbon dioxide in the case of cement directly as a result of the reaction that produces cement. So if we have to build in those materials, and we probably have to for a while more, then we have to ensure that we use them sparingly, as since they're valuable materials. And this, to my mind, is really the future of architecture, where we have to define how we will mm, how we will use materials less and less, so that finally, I mean, we should be able to build out of thin air. And that is the ultimate goal of architecture, isn't it? To be able to, I mean, even Rainer Banham, the architectural critic in the 1960s, wrote an article called a home is not a house. So he postulated that people can live in places like Woodstock and in the open air, and they don't need a building to condition their space. They can live with pods, and so that is would be the ultimate aim of architecture, that homes are not houses, but simply you can be able to live in a non-building, which would be a quite a crazy aim to aim for, but it's possible.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Sanjay, for taking time and being part of the podcast. I think we living in a world with unlimited possibility. And
Yeah.
it's, I think, the desire and intent which stops us from creating that world that we all wish for, but we don't have the intent or the guts to go for and build for it. I think we living in such a beautiful point of time where there is more accessibility of education and healthcare, and more people are economically empowered. We could create that society where everybody is living in peace and a beautiful world. But for that, I think we need to, the government, the industry, the academia, the design industry such as yourself, I think we need to all come together and understand what were the wrongs of a society, and possibly relook at that and say that, can we relocate, and maybe rather than having these small iteration that we keep on doing, reinvent ourselves. Yeah, we need to completely reinvent, because the future is demanding us, and that's the only way. And somehow I think I would like to leverage, talk about the nature. I think because nature is the only thing which doesn't, it's a circular thing. There is no because
the economy is circular.
Yeah, because there's nothing that we have built which doesn't create a problem, because in the effort of solving a problem, we solve one problem but create another problem. But I hope that we create products, services and solutions in the circular economy. So thank you once again for taking time and being part of the podcast. Wish you and the team at Shift the very best. And to my listeners, if you like what you see and hear, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye bye. Thank you, Sanjay. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.